They put their mother in a nursing home for her house, but the will said something else. The day Evelyn Harper's children drove her to Willow Rest, they told her it was only for a little while. That was the phrase they kept using, only for a little while. Her daughter Patricia said it while folding Evelyn's nightgowns into a brown suitcase. Her son Glenn said it while carrying a box of framed photographs out to the car. Her youngest daughter Carol said it with one hand on Evelyn's shoulder and the other hand already holding the house keys. Only for a little while, Mama. Just until you get stronger. Just until we figure things out. Just until the doctor says it is safe. But Evelyn Harper had lived long enough to know that when grown children start saying just until, they usually mean forever. She sat in the back seat of Patricia's car with her purse in her lap, wearing her good blue coat, the one her husband George had bought her the last winter before he died. It was too warm for October, but Evelyn wore it anyway because the coat still smelled faintly of cedar and peppermint, and because it made her feel less alone. They passed the grocery store where she had bought flour every Saturday morning for nearly 40 years. They passed the church where she had married George with trembling hands and a borrowed veil. They passed the little white house on Hawthorne Lane, the house George had spent his life paying for, painting, repairing, and protecting. Evelyn turned her head as they drove by. The porch light was still on. The curtains were open. Her yellow roses were leaning over the front walk because no one had tied them back after the last rain. For one moment, she thought Patricia might slow down. She thought maybe her children would turn into the driveway, help her up the steps, make her tea, and admit that everyone had been tired and frightened and had said things they did not mean. But Patricia kept driving. Evelyn watched the house disappear behind them. She did not ask where they were going. She already knew. Welcome to Mabel Creek Stories. Here, we tell quiet stories about family secrets, second chances, broken promises, and the kind of justice that does not always arrive loudly. But when it comes, it changes everything. If stories like this speak to you, subscribe to the channel, settle in, and stay with me until the end. Because in Mabel Creek, the truth has a way of finding its way home. Evelyn Harper had never been the kind of woman who made trouble. That was what people in Ashford Springs liked to say about her. She did not raise her voice at church meetings. She did not return gossip with sharper gossip. She did not send cold food back at the diner, even when the potatoes were hard in the middle. If a neighbor needed eggs, she gave eggs. If a young mother forgot to pick up a child from Sunday school, Evelyn waited with the child on the steps and pretended she had nowhere else to be. If someone borrowed a ladder and returned it with paint on one side, Evelyn cleaned it herself and said nothing. She was a gentle woman. But gentle is not the same as weak. That was the part her children had forgotten. George Harper never forgot it. He used to say Evelyn had a backbone wrapped in lace. She would blush whenever he said it, then tell him not to talk foolishness in front of company. But he knew. He had seen her hold a family together when money was thin. He had seen her sit beside sick beds without sleeping. He had seen her forgive things that would have made other people bitter. He had also seen the way their children looked at the house after he got sick. Not with love, with calculation. Patricia noticed the old oak floors and wondered what they might bring if polished. Glenn noticed the corner lot and said developers were buying everything near the new bypass. Carol noticed the silverware, the china cabinet, the grandfather clock, and the small safe George kept in the hall closet. Evelyn never saw it then. A mother sees what she wants to see until the truth stands too close to ignore. George saw it, and because George had been a quiet man, a patient man, and the kind of man who did not speak until he had thought a thing through, he did not accuse his children. He did not start arguments at holiday dinners. He did not ask Evelyn to choose sides. Instead, 6 months before he died, he took a folder to a lawyer named Naomi Pierce. Nobody in the family knew about it. Not Patricia, not Glenn, not Carol, not even Evelyn. George told Naomi that he wanted everything written plainly. No fancy words where plain words would do. No loopholes big enough for greedy people to crawl through. No confusion when the day came. Naomi had known George for many years. She had handled the sale of his hardware store after his knees went bad. She had helped him settle a boundary dispute with a neighbor behind the alley. She had seen him in grief and in anger and in worry. But that day, sitting in her office with his hat on his knees, George looked different. He looked like a man trying to protect someone from beyond the grave. He said, "Naomi, if I go first, I want Evelyn to keep her home." Naomi said, "Then that is what we will write." George shook his head. "No, I want more than that. I want to make sure nobody can smile at her, call it care, and take the house out from under her." Naomi looked up from her notes. "Your children?" George did not answer right away. He looked out the window at the courthouse lawn, where a young father was trying to button the little boy's coat, while the boy twisted around laughing. Then George said, "I hope not." That was all. "I hope not." Those 3 words would come back years later like a door opening in a dark hallway. At Willow Rest, the woman at the front desk smiled too much. Her name was Denise. She wore a purple sweater and had little pumpkin earrings that swung when she nodded. "We are so happy to have you with us, Miss Evelyn," she said. Evelyn heard the word have, not visit, not help, have. Patricia answered for her mother. "We are just getting her settled for a short stay." Denise's smile did not change, but her eyes moved toward the clipboard on the desk. Of course, there was always a clipboard. There had been one at the hospital when Evelyn fell in the kitchen and bruised her hip. There had been one at the clinic when her blood pressure frightened the nurse. There had been one at the bank when Glenn said they should add his name to an account in case anything happened. Clipboards, Evelyn had learned, were where people put quiet decisions they did not want to say out loud. Carol stood beside her with 2 shopping bags full of folded clothes. "You will like it here, Mama." Evelyn looked at her youngest child. Carol had always been the soft one as a girl. She cried over stray cats and broken dolls. She used to crawl into Evelyn's bed during thunderstorms and ask if heaven had thunder too. Now Carol was 54 and smelled of expensive perfume and worry. "Will I?" Evelyn asked. Carol looked away. The room they gave Evelyn was on the 2nd floor, near the end of a hallway that smelled like lemon cleaner and boiled vegetables. It had a narrow bed, a chair, a dresser, a window looking over the parking lot, and a framed print of a sailboat on a gray sea. Evelyn had never cared much for boats. Her whole life had been rooted in soil, wood, flowers, recipes, bills, laundry, weather, birthdays, and the sound of George's boots by the back door. Patricia set the suitcase on the bed. Glenn stood near the door, checking his phone. Carol opened the dresser drawers as if putting things away quickly would make the room feel less strange. Evelyn remained by the window. Down below, Patricia's car sat near the entrance, still running. It was one of those sleek, black vehicles that looked too shiny for gravel roads and too impatient for small towns. "When am I going home?" Evelyn asked. Nobody answered right away. That was how she knew, not from words, from the little silence that came before them. Patricia sighed. "Mama, we talked about this." "No," Evelyn said. "You talked near me. That is not the same." Glenn put his phone in his pocket. "This house is too much for you now." "My house?" "You know what I mean." Evelyn turned from the window. "Say what you mean, Glenn." His jaw tightened. "It is not safe. The stairs, the basement, the loose rail on the back porch. You fell once already." "I slipped on water. You could have broken your hip." But I did not. Patricia stepped in, using the voice she used when she wanted something to sound settled. This is not a punishment. It is care. Evelyn looked around the room. Care, she said quietly, has curtains a woman chose herself. Carol pressed a blouse into the drawer and did not speak. They stayed less than 20 minutes. Patricia kissed Evelyn on the cheek and said she would call tomorrow. Glenn patted her shoulder as if she were an old dog. Carol hugged her too tightly, then pulled away too fast. When they left, Evelyn stood in the open doorway and watched them go down the hall. Glenn was the last to look back. For 1 second, his face changed. Not regret exactly, more like discomfort. The look of a man who had done what he wanted, but did not enjoy seeing the cost of it. Then he turned the corner, and Evelyn was alone. That first night at Willow Rest, she did not sleep. The building made sounds her house had never made. A cart squeaked down the hallway. Someone coughed in the room next door. A television laughed behind a closed door. A nurse's shoes whispered over tile. Every few minutes, Evelyn opened her eyes and expected to see the ceiling fan in her own bedroom, the one George had installed crooked and never managed to fix. Instead, she saw the flat white ceiling of a room where she owned nothing. At dawn, a nurse named Ruth brought oatmeal on a tray. Ruth was a sturdy woman with kind brown eyes and a laugh that sounded like it had survived hard years. "Morning, Miss Evelyn." Evelyn pushed herself up. "Do you have coffee?" Ruth smiled. "I would not dare bring breakfast without it." That was the first decent thing Evelyn had heard since she arrived. Ruth set the tray on the small table by the bed and opened the curtains. The parking lot was silver with early fog. Evelyn looked at the oatmeal. "I'm not staying long," she said. Ruth did not argue. "Some folks do not," she said. "Some folks do." Evelyn picked up the spoon. "My children say it is for my own good. That phrase has done a lot of damage in this world." Evelyn looked up. Ruth adjusted the blanket at the foot of the bed. Then she said, "Eat while it is warm." Over the next week, Evelyn learned the rhythm of Willow Rest. Breakfast at the same hour, pills in little paper cups, exercise in the activity room, music on Tuesdays, bingo on Fridays, church service on Sunday afternoon, led by a young pastor who spoke loudly enough to be heard by people who did not need shouting. Some residents were cheerful, some were angry, some were somewhere else entirely, looking through the present as if it were a curtain. Evelyn was polite to everyone. She learned the names of the women at her table. Agnes, who had been a librarian and corrected everyone's grammar. Joyce, who had 5 sons and said none of them knew how to buy decent socks. Mildred, who carried a photograph of her late husband in her sweater pocket and showed it to people as if meeting him for the first time. But every afternoon, Evelyn sat by the window and looked toward the road. She was waiting for her children to come back and take her home. They did not. Patricia called twice. The first time she spoke quickly because she was between appointments. The second time, she asked whether Evelyn had signed the paperwork Carol had left in the folder. "What paperwork?" Evelyn asked. "Just some practical things." "What kind of practical things?" "Mama, please do not make this difficult." There it was, the line children use when they have forgotten who changed their diapers, who stayed up with their fevers, who cut sandwiches into little triangles because they would not eat them any other way. Evelyn looked at the folder on the dresser. Carol had placed it there on the first day. Evelyn had not opened it. "I will look," she said. "Please do." "Glenn has someone coming to look at the house next week." The room went still. "What do you mean, someone coming to look at the house?" Patricia breathed into the phone. "Mama, no, tell me." "It is just a realtor. We need to know what it is worth." Evelyn held the receiver with both hands. It is worth my life, Patricia. That is not what I meant. But it is what you are selling. There was a pause. Then Patricia said, "You are being unfair." Evelyn almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because unfair is a word people love to use when truth embarrasses them. She hung up gently. No slam, no sharp goodbye, just a soft click. Then she opened the folder. Inside were forms, a medical release, a financial authorization, a document giving Patricia, Glenn, and Carol the right to handle the sale of the house. The language was neat and cold. It said Evelyn Harper, being of sound mind, wished to leave her home at Hawthorne Lane and authorize her children to sell the property for her continued care. Evelyn read that sentence 3 times. Being of sound mind, wished to leave, authorize her children. She folded the document back into the folder. Then she took a pen from the dresser drawer and wrote one word across the signature line. No. Not in anger, not with a shaking hand, just no. The next afternoon, all 3 children came to Willow Rest together. That was how Evelyn knew the word no had reached them. Patricia wore a camel-colored coat and carried a leather handbag. Glenn wore a business shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the way he did when he wanted to appear practical. Carol wore a soft green sweater and looked as if she had been crying, though Evelyn could not tell whether the tears were for her mother or for the trouble her mother was causing. They found Evelyn in the sunroom, sitting beside Agnes and a fern that had seen better days. Patricia smiled at Agnes. "Could we have a moment with our mother?" Agnes looked over her glasses. "You may have a moment. She is not a library book." Evelyn almost smiled. They brought her to a small visiting room with floral chairs and a painting of a covered bridge. Glenn closed the door. Patricia placed the folder on the table. "Mama, we need to talk." Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. "Then talk." Glenn sat forward. "Do you understand how much this place costs?" "No," Evelyn said. "Because none of you asked me whether I wanted to be here before you started spending money on it." Patricia closed her eyes for a second. "This is exactly what we were afraid of." "Afraid of what?" "That you would get emotional and refuse to see reality." Evelyn looked at her daughter for a long moment. Patricia had been a serious child. She used to line her crayons by color and cry if Glenn mixed them. She liked rules because rules made her feel safe. But somewhere along the way, Patricia had begun using rules to make other people small. "The reality," Evelyn said, "is that I want to go home." "You cannot live alone." "Then help me." "We are trying to help you." "No," Evelyn said. "You are trying to remove me." Carol covered her mouth. Glenn's face hardened. "This is about the house." Evelyn nodded. "Yes, it is." "It is just a house," Glenn said. The words were careless. He regretted them as soon as they left his mouth. Evelyn saw it. She did not let him take them back. "Just a house," she repeated. "The house where your father worked nights to pay the mortgage after the factory closed?" Glenn looked down. "The house where Patricia had scarlet fever, and I sat with ice cloths on her forehead for 3 nights?" Patricia's lips pressed together. "The house where Carol scratched her name under the kitchen table because she thought hidden writing lived forever?" Carol began to cry. Evelyn reached for the folder and pushed it toward them. "I will not sign." Patricia's voice became thin. "Then we may have to take other steps." Evelyn looked at her. "What steps?" Nobody answered. Again, the silence told the truth before words could dress it up. 2 days later, Evelyn's neighbor, Henry Cole, called Willow Rest. Henry was 81, widowed, stubborn, and had lived next door to the Harpers for 30 years. He had a bad knee, a worse temper when it came to weeds, and a habit of knowing what happened on Hawthorne Lane before anyone told him. Ruth brought the phone to Evelyn in the hallway. "There's a gentleman asking for you." Evelyn took the receiver. "Hello? Evelyn? It is Henry. Did you sell your house?" Her breath caught. "No." "That is what I thought. What happened?" "There is a sign in your yard." Evelyn gripped the phone. "What kind of sign?" "The kind that says a house is coming soon for sale. Your son was there this morning with a woman in red shoes taking pictures of the porch." For a moment, Evelyn could not speak. Henry's voice softened. "You did not know?" "No." "I figured." Through the receiver, she heard Henry exhale sharply. "George would climb out of his grave if he saw that sign." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Henry." I know. I should not say things like that." "No," she whispered. "You are right." After she hung up, Evelyn sat in the hallway with the phone still in her lap. People walked around her. A nurse asked if she was all right. Evelyn said yes, because it was easier than explaining that a woman can survive grief, illness, and age, but still be undone by the sight of her children selling the front porch where their father used to drink coffee. That evening, Evelyn asked Ruth for paper. "Any kind." Ruth brought her a small notepad with a picture of daisies on the front. Evelyn wrote a letter to Naomi Pierce. She did not know whether Naomi was still practicing law. She did not know whether the office was still beside the courthouse. She did not even know whether Naomi would remember her. But George had trusted Naomi once, and Evelyn, having very little else left in her hands, trusted George. The letter was short. "Dear Naomi, this is Evelyn Harper, George's wife. My children have placed me at Willow Rest and are trying to sell the house on Hawthorne Lane. I do not know what George arranged, if anything. I only know he always said I would never have to leave that house unless I wanted to. If you know anything that can help me, please come." She signed her name carefully. Then she asked Ruth if she could mail it. Ruth looked at the envelope. "Is this urgent?" "Yes." "Then I will take it myself on my lunch break." Evelyn stared at her. "You would do that?" Ruth tucked the envelope into her pocket. "My mother lost her home because everyone around her called it practical. I've never liked that word since." 4 days passed. During those 4 days, Patricia did not call. Glenn did not visit. Carol came once, but she spent most of the visit crying into a tissue and saying she wished things were different. Evelyn finally asked, "Who exactly is stopping them from being different?" Carol had no answer. On the 5th day, Naomi Pierce walked into Willow Rest wearing a navy coat, sensible shoes, and the expression of a woman who had read something that made her angry in a professional way. She was older than Evelyn remembered. Her hair, once dark brown, was now almost white. She leaned slightly on a cane, but her eyes were sharp. "Evelyn Harper," she said. Evelyn stood too quickly and had to grip the arm of her chair. Naomi crossed the room and took both of Evelyn's hands. "George said you would come," Evelyn whispered. Naomi's face changed at the sound of his name. George was a good man. He was. And he was worried. Evelyn looked toward the hallway. "About the children?" Naomi did not answer immediately. She lowered herself into the chair beside Evelyn and placed a leather folder on the table. "Tell me what happened." So Evelyn told her. Not dramatically, not with tears. She told it the way a woman tells the truth when she has grown tired of protecting people who are not protecting her. She told Naomi about the fall in the kitchen, the hospital, the ride past the house, the room at Willow Rest, the forms, the realtor, the sign in the yard. Naomi listened without interrupting. When Evelyn finished, Naomi opened the folder. "Your husband came to see me before he passed. I did not know. He did not want you worried. That sounds like George. He created a trust. Evelyn frowned. A trust? For the house, the savings, and a few other things. I never understood those things. You do not need to. I will explain the plain part. Naomi took out a document, then another. The house belongs to the trust. You have the right to live there for the rest of your life, as long as you wish to remain there and are not declared legally unable to make your own decisions by a proper court. My children said it was unsafe. That is not the same thing. Evelyn breathed in slowly. Naomi continued. They cannot sell the house without your consent. They cannot force you to sign. They cannot move you here permanently just because it is convenient. And if they attempt to sell the property, profit from the property, or remove you from the property in bad faith, George included a penalty clause. Evelyn blinked. A what? Naomi's mouth tightened. Let us call it George being George. For the first time in days, Evelyn almost laughed. What does it say? Naomi opened a separate envelope. The paper inside was cream-colored and folded in thirds. This part is not legal language. This part is a letter. To me? Naomi shook her head. To them. The next morning, Naomi Pierce called Patricia, Glenn, and Carol. She did not explain everything over the phone. Lawyers rarely do that when they want people to sit still and listen. She simply said there were documents concerning their father's estate, and their presence was required at her office the following Friday. Patricia asked if it could wait. Naomi said no. Glenn asked whether this had anything to do with the house. Naomi said yes. Carol asked whether their mother was in trouble. Naomi said, Your mother is the only person in this situation who is not. On Friday morning, the 3 Harper children arrived at Naomi's office together. They looked like people who had agreed on a story in the parking lot. Patricia was crisp and controlled. Glenn was irritated. Carol looked pale. Evelyn sat already inside Naomi's conference room, wearing her blue coat. Ruth had helped her with her hair that morning. Henry Cole had driven her there because Patricia had not offered, and because Henry said he had always wanted to see a lawyer make Glenn sweat. Henry waited outside. When the children saw their mother, they stopped. Patricia recovered first. Mama, what is this? Evelyn looked at Naomi. Naomi stood at the head of the table. Please sit. Glenn did not. Is this about the house? Yes. We are only trying to do what is best for her. Naomi looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I hear that phrase often. Glenn's face reddened. Patricia sat down. Carol sat beside her. After a moment, Glenn sat too. Naomi placed copies of the trust documents in front of them. Your father created the Harper Family Trust before his death. The house on Hawthorne Lane is part of that trust. Evelyn Harper has the right to live in that house for the remainder of her life, provided she chooses to do so and retains legal capacity. Patricia skimmed the page. We never saw this. No, Naomi said. You did not. Why not? Glenn demanded. Because your father did not wish you to mistake knowledge for permission. Carol looked at Evelyn. Mama, did you know about this? No. Patricia's eyes moved quickly down the page. This does not change the fact that she cannot live alone. Naomi folded her hands. That may be discussed. Home care may be arranged. Repairs may be made. Neighbors may help. Medical recommendations may be followed. But none of those things gives you ownership of the house. Glenn leaned back. Nobody said ownership. Naomi slid another paper across the table. Then why did a realtor place a coming soon sign in the yard? Silence. Patricia looked at Glenn. Glenn looked at Carol. Carol looked down. Naomi let the silence stretch. Then she opened the cream-colored letter. Your father also left a statement to be read if any of you attempted to sell the house while your mother was alive and unwilling." Evelyn looked at the paper. She recognized George's handwriting at the top. Her breath caught. Naomi began to read. "My children, if you are hearing this letter, then something has gone wrong in your hearts. Your mother gave her life to you in ways you will never fully know. She went without so you could have enough. She defended you when you were wrong, worried over you when you were careless, and forgave you more times than you deserved. The house on Hawthorne Lane is not an investment. It is not a problem to solve. It is not a pile of boards waiting to be turned into money. It is your mother's home. If she chooses to leave it, help her leave with dignity. If she chooses to stay, help her stay with dignity. But if you try to take it from her while calling it care, then you have forgotten the first thing she taught you. Family does not measure love by convenience." Naomi paused. Nobody moved. Evelyn kept her eyes on the table, because if she looked at her children, she might break. Naomi continued, "Under the terms of my estate plan, any child who attempts in bad faith to remove Evelyn from her home, force the sale of the home, or profit from the sale of the home against her wishes, forfeits his or her share of the trust distribution connected to that property. Instead, that share shall go toward Evelyn's care, the upkeep of the house, and, after her passing, to the Ashford Springs Home Repair Fund for elderly residents who wish to remain safely in their own homes." Glenn sat forward. "That is not legal." Naomi looked at him. "It is." Patricia's lips parted, but no words came. Carol started crying softly. Naomi finished the letter. "If you have done this out of fear, apologize and make it right. If you have done this out of greed, then may the empty rooms you inherit teach you what your mother tried to teach with love. Your father, George Harper." When Naomi set the letter down, the room felt smaller. Outside the window, a truck passed on the street. Somewhere in the office, a printer hummed and stopped. Patricia reached for the trust document again, but her fingers trembled. Glenn stared at the table. Carol covered her face. Evelyn sat very still. For years after George died, she had wondered whether she had imagined the strength of his love, because grief can make a person polish memories until they shine brighter than truth. But there it was, on paper. He had seen what she had not wanted to see, and he had protected her anyway. Patricia was the first to speak. "Mama, we were scared." Evelyn looked at her. "Were you?" Patricia swallowed. "Yes." "Scared of what? Of you falling? Of the bills? Of everything?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Those are real fears." Patricia reached across the table. "Then you understand." Evelyn did not take her hand. "I understand fear. I do not understand putting papers in front of me that say I chose what I did not choose." Patricia pulled her hand back. Glenn said, "We had to think ahead." Evelyn turned to him. "No, Glenn, you thought around me." His mouth closed. Carol whispered, "I am sorry." Evelyn looked at her youngest daughter. "For what?" Carol's face crumpled. "For knowing it felt wrong and doing it anyway." That answer did something to the room. It was the first honest thing any of them had said. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "Thank you." Carol looked up. "Does that mean you forgive me?" "No," Evelyn said gently. "It means you told the truth. Forgiveness is not a door people get to kick open because they finally feel bad." Naomi looked down, hiding the smallest smile. By the end of the meeting, the realtor had been called. The sign would be removed that afternoon. The listing agreement, never properly authorized, would be withdrawn. Patricia, Glenn, and Carol were informed in clear language that any further attempt to pressure their mother could have legal consequences, and financial ones. Glenn did not like this. He liked things he could control.
He had spent much of his adult life believing that firmness was the same as wisdom. But even Glenn could read the room. Even Glenn could see that George Harper had left no soft corner for him to push against. On the drive back to Willow Rest, Henry Cole asked Evelyn if she wanted the radio on. "No," she said. He drove in silence for a while. Then he said, "George was always better at planning than people gave him credit for." Evelyn smiled through her tears. He kept every screw he ever found in a coffee can. A man like that does not leave a house unprotected. Evelyn looked out the window. They passed the bakery, the post office, the church, then Hawthorne Lane. Henry slowed the car without asking. The "coming soon" sign was still there when they passed, tilted a little in the wind. Evelyn stared at it. "Take me closer." Henry turned into the driveway. "You sure?" "Yes." He parked by the curb. Evelyn opened her door before he could come around to help. She walked slowly across the grass, her cane sinking slightly into the damp ground. The house stood quiet before her, a little shabby, a little tired. The paint near the porch rail had peeled again. The maple leaves had gathered in the gutter. The rose bush needed pruning. It was imperfect. In every way a loved thing is imperfect. Evelyn reached the sign, gripped it with both hands, and pulled. It did not move. Henry came up behind her. "Let me." Together they loosened it from the ground. The wooden stake came free with a wet sound. Evelyn held the sign for a moment. Then she laid it flat beside the trash cans. Henry chuckled. "Should I stomp on it?" Evelyn looked at him. "No." Then she smiled. "Not where the neighbors can see." 3 days later, Evelyn moved home. Not because everything was easy. It was not. Naomi arranged a home care aide for mornings. Henry fixed the back porch rail and complained the whole time. Ruth came by on her day off with a casserole and a list of local services. The church sent 2 men to install grab bars in the bathroom. Agnes from Willow Rest mailed Evelyn a note correcting the grammar on the facility newsletter and saying she expected a visit. Evelyn's bedroom was moved downstairs to the small den where George used to keep his fishing magazines. The rugs were taped down. The basement door was locked unless someone was with her. A medical alert button hung around her neck, though Evelyn hated wearing it and said it made her feel like a cow with a bell. But she was home. On her first morning back, she made coffee in her own kitchen. The kettle rattled. The floor creaked near the sink. Sunlight came through the lace curtains and touched the table where George used to read the newspaper. Evelyn set 2 mugs out by habit. Then she stopped. For years after George died, that habit had made her sad. That morning, it made her feel accompanied. She poured coffee into one mug and placed the other back in the cabinet. Not because she had forgotten him, because he had not forgotten her. The children did not come the first week. Patricia sent a text message through Ruth because Evelyn had never liked texting and refused to learn beyond yes, no, and thank you. The message said she was sorry for how things happened and hoped they could talk soon. Evelyn wrote back one word: soon. Glenn did not contact her. Carol called every evening, but did not always speak. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she apologized. Sometimes Evelyn simply listened, because guilt, like fever, has to sweat itself out. The second Sunday after Evelyn came home, Patricia knocked at the back door. Not the front, the back, where family entered. Evelyn knew the sound of that knock. Patricia had knocked that way as a teenager after missing curfew. Soft at first, then 2 quick taps,
because she was afraid George would wake before Evelyn did. Evelyn opened the door. Patricia stood on the steps holding a paper bag. "I brought muffins." Evelyn looked at the bag. "Store-bought?" Patricia's eyes filled. "Yes. Then they are probably dry." Patricia laughed once, a broken little laugh. "May I come in?" Evelyn stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of them touched the muffins. Patricia looked around the room the way people do when they realize a place they thought they owned has a life without them. The same clock ticked above the stove. The same blue sugar bowl sat by the coffee pot. The same faded photograph of the Harper children hung near the pantry, all three of them muddy and grinning in the yard one summer afternoon long before money, property, fear, and resentment had learned their names. Patricia looked at that photograph and began to cry. "I thought I was being responsible." Evelyn poured coffee. "I believe you thought that. That is not the same as believing me." "No," Evelyn said, "it is not." Patricia wiped her face. "Daddy knew." "Yes, before he died, he knew." Evelyn looked at her daughter. "Your father saw people clearly. He loved them anyway, but he saw them." Patricia stared at her hands. "Did he hate us?" Evelyn felt the question land in the room. She could have answered quickly. She could have comforted Patricia the way mothers often do, rushing to soften pain their children have earned. But Evelyn had learned something at Willow Rest. Comfort given too soon can become another lie. So she took her time. "No," she said at last, "he did not hate you." Patricia looked up. "But he was disappointed." "Yes." The word hurt. It was supposed to. Patricia nodded as if accepting a sentence. "I do not know how to fix this." Evelyn pushed the sugar bowl toward her. "Then start smaller." "How?" "Come here next Saturday. Bring gloves. The roses need tying back." Patricia looked at her. "That is it?" "That is Saturday." For the first time in a long time, Patricia did not argue. She nodded. Carol came next. She arrived with a stack of homemade meals, a bag of yarn, and eyes swollen from days of crying. She did not try to explain. That was her first wise choice. She simply stood in the kitchen and said, "I was a coward." Evelyn was cutting apples at the counter. "Yes." Carol flinched, but she did not run. I kept waiting for Patricia and Glenn to stop it. Evelyn peeled a strip of apple skin slowly. "Why did you not stop it?" Carol shook her head. "Because I wanted everyone to like me." Evelyn set the knife down. "And did they?" Carol cried then, not loudly, just one hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. Evelyn did not rush to embrace her. She waited. Then Carol stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother, carefully, as if Evelyn were both fragile and made of stone. "I am so sorry." Evelyn closed her eyes. "I know." "Can I come tomorrow?" "For what?" "To help." Evelyn opened her eyes. "Bring your sewing basket. The kitchen curtains need mending." Carol laughed through tears. "You still have those curtains? Your father hated them. He said they looked like a tablecloth had given up and climbed the window." Carol laughed harder, and for a moment, the old kitchen sounded almost like it used to. Glenn took longer. Pratt is a stubborn animal. It paces. It growls. It refuses to come when called. Weeks passed before he appeared at the front door. By then, the roses were tied back. The porch rail was solid. The basement light had been fixed, and Evelyn had begun walking to the mailbox every morning again, slowly, but on her own feet. It was a cold morning when Glenn came. Evelyn saw him through the front window. He stood at the end of the walk with his hands in his coat pockets, staring at the house. For a moment, He looked like a boy who had lost his way home. She opened the door. "Glenn," he nodded. "Mom." Neither moved. Then Glenn said, "I talked to Naomi. I assumed you would." He looked toward the porch rail. "Henry fixed that crooked." Evelyn's mouth twitched. "Do not say that where he can hear you." Glenn almost smiled. Then the almost vanished. "I was angry about the trust." "I know. I thought Daddy treated us like criminals." Evelyn waited. Glenn looked at the ground.
Then I realized I was only angry because he wrote down what I was trying to pretend I was not doing. The wind moved dry leaves along the walk. Evelyn leaned on her cane. That was honest. Glenn nodded once. It did not make him look relieved. Honesty often makes people look tired first. "I am sorry," he said. "For what?" His eyes lifted. "For calling your home just a house." Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in." Glenn entered the house quietly. He looked bigger than the kitchen remembered him. Broader shoulders, thinner hair. A man's tired eyes where a boy's impatience used to be. Evelyn made coffee. Glenn sat at the table and touched the small nick in the wood near his place. "I made this," he said, "with your father's screwdriver." He was furious. He was trying not to laugh. Glenn looked up. "Was he?" "Oh, yes. He waited until you went upstairs, then laughed into a dish towel." Glenn's face bent in a way Evelyn had not seen since the funeral. He covered his eyes. "I miss him." Evelyn set the coffee down. "So do I." That was the day the healing began. Not all at once. Stories that end too neatly are usually pretending. Patricia still liked control. Glenn still got defensive. Carol still apologized when she had not done anything wrong, and sometimes failed to apologize when she had. Evelyn still felt flashes of anger when she passed Willow Rest. She still woke some nights and imagined the sound of that room, the hallway, the cart squeaking, the feeling of being placed somewhere like a thing that had become inconvenient. But the house changed. Not because it became perfect, because people began showing up to repair what they had almost broken. On Saturdays, Patricia worked in the garden. She did not know what she was doing at first. She pulled 2 flowers thinking they were weeds and got a lecture from Evelyn that lasted longer than the flowers had lived. Glenn repaired the porch steps, then the loose cabinet hinge, then the fence gate. He complained about old wood and bad nails, but he came back the next week with better tools. Carol mended curtains, made soup, and sat with Evelyn in the evenings, knitting uneven scarves and asking questions about George she should have asked years ago. One afternoon, while they were sorting through the hall closet, Carol found the coffee can full of screws. She held it up. "Mama, why did Daddy keep all these?" Evelyn took the can and shook it gently. "Because every small thing might be needed one day." Carol looked at the can, then at her mother. "I think that is the most George thing I have ever heard." Evelyn smiled. They found other things, too. A birthday card Patricia had made in 3rd grade. A baseball glove Glenn thought had been thrown away. A tiny wooden cat Carol had carved badly at summer camp. Receipts, old keys, photographs, recipes, a ribbon from the county fair. George's pocket knife. Evelyn's wedding gloves wrapped in tissue. The house had kept all of it. Not because any of it was valuable, because love often looks like clutter until someone almost throws it away. By Thanksgiving, Evelyn invited her children to dinner, not because everything was forgiven, because forgiveness, when it is real, sometimes begins as an invitation with conditions. Patricia brought pies, store-bought, but warmed in the oven so they smelled almost homemade. Glenn brought a folding table from his garage. Carol brought sweet potatoes and cried when Evelyn let her use George's old carving knife. Henry came too, because Evelyn said he had earned a plate for pulling that sign out of the yard. Ruth came after her shift at Willow Rest, still in her work shoes, with rolls wrapped in a towel. Naomi Pierce came last, carrying flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider. The house filled with coats, voices, steam on the windows, and the smell of turkey. At the table, before anyone ate, Evelyn stood. Not quickly, not dramatically.
She stood with one hand on the table and the other resting near George's empty chair. Everyone quieted. "I want to say something," she began. Patricia looked worried. Glenn looked at his plate. Carol clasped her hands. Evelyn looked around the room. "This house has held a great deal. Babies, arguments, sickness, bills, birthdays, grief, bad coffee, good pie, your father's singing, which was not good but was sincere." Henry snorted. Evelyn continued. "It has also held mistakes, big ones." No one moved. For a while, I thought the house was what I needed protected. She paused. Then she touched the back of George's chair. "But I think your father knew better." He was not only protecting the house, he was protecting the memory of who we were supposed to be inside it. Carol was crying again. Patricia wiped her cheek. Glenn swallowed hard. Evelyn looked at her children. "I'm not ready to pretend nothing happened." They nodded. "But I am ready to see what happens next." That was all. No grand speech, no perfect ending. Just a door, open enough for people to walk through, if they were willing. After dinner, Glenn washed dishes, Patricia dried, Carol packed leftovers. Naomi sat with Evelyn in the living room while Henry fell asleep in George's old chair and denied it whenever he woke himself snoring. The house sounded alive again. Naomi looked around and said, "George would be pleased." Evelyn smiled. "He would say the gravy was too salty." "It was, I know." They sat quietly for a while. Then Evelyn said, "Did he know the children might come around?" Naomi thought about it. George hoped they would, but he prepared in case they did not. "That was George," Evelyn said. "Hope in one hand, hammer in the other." Naomi laughed. Yes, that was George. Winter came early that year. Snow settled on Hawthorne Lane in soft layers. The roses slept under burlap. The porch rail held firm. The house glowed at night with warm yellow windows. Sometimes, Evelyn still sat at the kitchen table and read George's letter. Naomi had given her a copy. The original stayed in the file, safe and official, but the copy lived in Evelyn's recipe box, between the pecan pie card and the biscuit recipe George said had once convinced him to propose. She did not read it because she liked thinking badly of her children. She read it because love had taken the time to become protection. There are people who say paperwork is cold. Sometimes it is. But sometimes a signature is a hand reaching forward through time. Sometimes a clause is a locked door between the vulnerable and the greedy. Sometimes a will says more than who gets what. Sometimes it says, "I knew you. I saw what might happen. And I stayed." One snowy afternoon, Glenn came by to shovel the walk. Evelyn watched from the window as he worked. He moved like George in small ways, now that she had time to notice. The set of his shoulders, the way he paused to lean on the shovel and look at the roofline, the way he kicked snow from his boots before coming inside. When he entered, his face was red from cold. "Coffee?" Evelyn asked. "Please,"
He sat at the kitchen table. After a while, he said, "Mom?" "Yes." "What happens to the house when you are gone?" Evelyn poured the coffee slowly. A year earlier, that question would have felt like a blade. Now it sounded different. Not harmless, but different. "Why do you ask?" Glenn rubbed his hands together. "Because I do not want to ask too late, and I do not want you thinking I am asking the old way." Evelyn sat across from him. "Naomi and I have talked." Glenn nodded. "I figured." "The house will not be sold immediately. There will be time. Some things will go to you children. Some will go where your father wanted. Some money will help older people stay in their homes safely." Glenn looked toward the hallway. "The repair fund." "Yes." He nodded slowly. "That seems right." Evelyn studied him. "Do you mean that?" He met her eyes. "I do." She believed him. Not completely, not blindly, but enough to let the words sit between them, without suspicion eating them alive. That is one of the quiet gifts of a second chance. It does not erase the first failure. It simply asks whether a person is willing to be different while there is still time. In the spring, the Ashford Springs Home Repair Fund received its first donation. It came from Evelyn. Not because she had much to spare, because she knew what it meant to look at a loose rail and wonder whether that rail might decide the rest of your life. Naomi helped set it up properly. Henry grumbled that committees ruin everything, but joined anyway. Ruth became the first person to recommend families who needed help. Patricia organized paperwork. Glenn found contractors who would work honestly. Carol made phone calls and discovered she was braver when calling on behalf of someone else. By summer, 3 older residents had safer bathrooms. One had a repaired porch. Another had a bedroom moved downstairs. Every time Evelyn heard about one of them, she thought of George. The house he protected had become protection for others. That would have made him quietly proud. He would not have said much. He might have cleared his throat, looked out the window, and said the grass needed cutting. But Evelyn would have known. Late that summer, Evelyn sat on the porch at sunset. Patricia was tying back roses with more confidence now. Glenn was arguing with Henry about the correct way to fix a gate. Carol was inside making lemonade too sweet, because she always forgot Evelyn liked it sharp. A little breeze moved through the maple leaves. The house creaked behind her. Not sadly, just settling. Evelyn closed her eyes. For a moment, she could almost hear George on the porch steps. Not in a ghostly way, in a memory way. The way love leaves echoes in places where it was practiced daily. She imagined him sitting beside her, hat on his knee, looking out at the yard. "Well," Evelyn would have said, "you made quite a mess with that letter." And George would have smiled that slow smile of his. Needed making. She opened her eyes. Patricia laughed at something Henry said. Glenn shook his head. Carol appeared in the doorway with the lemonade. For a while, Evelyn simply watched them. They were not perfect children. They never had been. She was not a perfect mother. No one who loves long enough gets to stay perfect. But they were there, in the yard, in the house, trying. And sometimes, trying, when it comes after truth, is the first honest kind of love. Years later, people in Ashford Springs still told the story of the Harper house. Some told it like a warning. Do not try to sell your mother's home while she is still living in her heart. Some told it like a joke. George Harper had been dead for years and still managed to win an argument. Some told it like a miracle. An old woman went into Willow Rest and came back stronger than when she entered. But Evelyn never told it any of those ways. When someone asked her what happened, she would look toward the roses, or the porch rail, or the kitchen window glowing at dusk. Then she would say, "My children forgot the house had a memory,
and George reminded them. That was all. But it was enough, because the will did say who owned the house. It said who could not sell it. It said what would happen if greed came dressed as concern. But beneath all the legal words, beneath the signatures and folded pages and careful clauses, the will said something much simpler. It said, Evelyn Harper was not finished. It said her life was still hers. It said a home is not just where your children were raised. Sometimes it is where they must return to learn what they forgot.
And on quiet evenings, when the porch light came on and the house on Hawthorne Lane glowed warm against the dark, Evelyn would sit by the window with a cup of tea and think about the day they had driven her away. Only for a little while, they had said. Only for a little while. In the end, they were right. She was gone only for a little while. Then she came home, and this time, no one could take that